Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. It's time for the C3 stream. All right, good evening, welcome. So glad to be with you. Welcome to the C3 stream. Welcome to Tuesday night teaching, everybody. I hope you have some sort of warm beverage and a blanket and a Bible nearby. How is everybody this evening? It is so good to be back. Last week, hopefully you had a chance to watch. We did a pre-recorded stream last week. We are live this week, which is always a lot of fun. My preference. Last week, we covered a ton of ground. And, sorry, I'm just getting my tea ready. You guys know me. If you know me well, you know tea is of the utmost importance. I am drinking Evening in Missoula tea, I believe is what it is. I was out snowblowing. We had a bunch of meetings today. And then I went outside and I had to snowblow. And I worked up a sweat snowblowing. Holy cow. You guys, how many of you had a lot of snow? Little snow or a lot of snow? What did you guys get hit with? I'm in Port Washington. We got a decent amount of snow. 4 inches? 5 inches maybe? But at the end of the driveway was piled up. Do you guys have a lot of snow? I had a lot of snow. But, anyways, we're here for Bible study. So, last week we talked about all sorts of stuff. We finished off with the Exile. We finished off with talking about how there was this huge movement, this big shift that took place last week when we went into what is referred to as the Babylonian exile. There's a bunch of stuff rolling around in people's heads and hearts and all this sort of stuff. And so we're going to recap a little bit of that, and then we'll dive into the new content. We're going to be trying to cover, really, and wrapping up the Old Testament. That's what we're going to try to do tonight, is wrap up the Old Testament, more or less. There is a period between the Testaments, the New Testament, the Old Testament. There's a period that is often referred to as the intertestamental. Say that 10 times fast. Intertestamental period. The intertestamental period that we'll cover next week. And it's pretty fascinating. There's some good stuff in there. It's like what happens between the Old Testament where it finishes and then when Jesus springs on the scene. So we'll talk about that next week. But this week we're going to be covering the books of Daniel tonight, Ezra tonight, Nehemia tonight, and who knows? A lot of snow in Cedarburg, Grafton. Orange spice tea. I like it. Yeah, we got a lot, right? I'm so tired of the snow and the cold. Orange spiced tea. I did not know that the Hayhurst family. Linda, you're a tea drinker. I did not know that. That's turmeric ginger. Last time Kevin and I were out at a cafe, I think he got turmeric ginger tea. Anybody else drinking anything fun? What are you guys drinking tonight? You drinking anything fun? Who's got hot cocoa tonight? Who's got tea tonight? Who's got a cup of decaf tonight? Throw it in the comments, will you? I'm curious. Let's see. So, tonight we're going to be covering Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. A little bit of, we can see if we can dance in Esther if we have some time. And, yeah, really just kind of cleaning up Haggai and Zechariah as well. We'll overlap, but we're going to be sticking to our narrative, like story-based theme experience. Evening tea for Trudy. Does that make you sleepy? I always get sleepy when if it's like the chamomile mix. Turmeric ginger too! And Joe's hitting his protein shake. Hey, 160 something today, so I hit my mark. Yeah, turmeric ginger is very good. Evening tea, Trudy. If it's like chamomile, I love it. That stuff's good stuff. Anybody else? What are y'all drinking? Anybody else? So that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to be covering a couple books of the Bible, finishing it up. Decaf, but always coffee. Expect nothing less, Mom. Love it. Decaf, but always coffee. I already tapped out my coffee intake for the day. Yep. Tell you about my hat. This is my snowblowing hat. Do you guys like my hat? It is authentic. Let me see. Genuine rabbit. Look, I'm not making it up. I think I stole it growing up from my dad, if I'm honest. This is my snowblowing hat, and since I was out snowblowing and hopped in and out of the shower, I threw it back on because it's thematic. You gotta wear a hat. I'm a hat fan. So, it's my nice, warm Wisconsinite hat. Get in a thumbs up. Thank you, Linda. Linda likes my hat. I appreciate it. All right, I'm diddle-daddling. Forgive me. You guys ready to jump in? Shall we do it? Let's do it. And Michelle joins us. Good evening, Michelle. So glad to have you here. Coming in with a warm peppermint tea. Classic. Love it. I do like peppermint tea. Like a mint tea of any kind. When I was a canoe guide, Boundary Waters, I used to be able to make tea based on what I could forage for. It was very cool. I felt very cool. And the kids thought it was just awesome. And there was wild peppermint if you knew where to look. If you looked in the right spots, there was wild peppermint and wild wintergreen as well. And you could make truly, like, talk about organic tea. If I say I like your hat, will you shovel my driveway too? Good to know that, yes, Joe, listen to you. Are you funny or what, man? I was working hard today, and I had a snowblower, and I had to try to scrape it apart. It was so packed down thick. Holy cow. I was working hard for it. I'm not going to lie. Not going to lie. I was working hard on it. All right, so here's the cool thing. Look at this. Look at this. See if this works tonight. I tried something new, so you guys can see the comments from each other. You see that on the right screen? That's kind of cool, isn't it? See if it works. I don't know if it's going to work. I hope it's going to work. Maybe you guys can only see some, but not all. Like, where's the latest comments? Decaf, but always coffee. Well, I'm trying, guys. Trying. I want you guys to see what each other are saying, too. To answer your question, Joe... If I say I like your hat, will you shower my driveway too? No, you've got strapping Adam nearby. He's a strong young man, right? He's a strong young guy. One lesson PB always taught me: if you're gonna live in Wisconsin, if God calls you to Wisconsin, buy the biggest snowblower you can possibly afford and take care of it. Maintain it and take care of it, for it will take care of you. And he's not wrong. All right. Here we go. This is where we left off, talking about the theological kind of faith shift that took place when the Jewish people went into exile. So they have been dragged off into ancient Babylon, stripped of their homes, stripped of their identity, stripped of everything that they knew, everything that they were accustomed to. And you can see how, more particularly, their community, the graphic that this is supposed to do, you see how there's like all the people, and then, you know, in the center of the people is, that's supposed to be a diagram of the temple, going all the way back to Solomon's temple, and that the community itself had kind of, yes, you do need to drain the fuel in spring, Tracy. You are so right. And in fact, you run it out, and then if you're like me, you can even dump maintenance stuff in there. Fogs it like crazy, but it takes care of it, and it's worth it. Otherwise, if you leave the fuel in there, you're going to be in trouble. Totally with you. Totally with you. So the Jewish community had really grounded themselves and identified themselves based on temple worship, temple practice. They defined what it meant to be Jewish by the willingness to show up and worship at the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. And when they go into captivity, the Jerusalem temple is destroyed, razed to the ground, shredded, not happening type thing, right? So then they have to reconstruct for themselves, what does it mean? What does it mean to be Jewish? What does it mean for the Jewish people to who have so historically defined themselves by their faith expressed as worship at the temple, Solomon's temple, to now have to redefine what it means to be Jewish. And that's why in that top left-hand corner, you get all those commandments and laws. So what happens is the temple moves out of the center and the Hebrew scriptures moves into the forefront. You with me? The Hebrew scriptures moves into the center light. And now, how well you know the scriptures, and particularly how well you follow the scriptures, that's what makes you Jewish. That's what defines you. That's what it means to be Jewish, is to know those laws and obey those laws and to keep those laws. And the preservation of those laws and that way of living is made possible even in a faraway or distant land, even when you are surrounded by a bunch of pagans, people who worship other gods, right? You can continue to be Jewish even if you don't worship at the temple, because you obey the 10 Commandments and the other laws about diet and sanitation and all the other stuff, okay? So out with the temple, in with the 613 laws, the 10 Commandments. You can see in the upper right-hand side there, kind of the 10 Commandments tablet kind of thing, with question marks to the left and the right. That has to do with how do you deal with God and how do you deal with your neighbor. You know, the first 4 commandments have to do with how you interact with and have a relationship with God, and the latter commandments have to do with how you relate to and serve your neighbor. So the Hebrew scriptures take center stage with what it means to be Jewish, and ultimately moves the Jewish people into a service-oriented people, a people that expresses worship through service to the neighbor, which is why in the bottom right-hand side you see that person kneeling. That kind of becomes the emphasis, is how do you treat people, becomes the emphasis in the Jewish faith during this Babylonian exile. How do you treat one another? How do you live? And they do live different. Like, there's a reason why God put the 613 commandments in there, the 613 laws. They distinguish them from all their other neighbors and all the other cultures and all the other value sets that could otherwise creep in, right? So they have been dragged off into exile, but are still finding ways now, are reconstructing how they are going to retain their Jewish identity and what it means to be Jewish. So here's an example where you can see the temple top left destroyed. It is razed. In 721, the northern kingdom, the first major exodus happens. The northern kingdom is destroyed, and we lose 10 out of the 12 tribes. And then in 597, 587, Babylon conquers and drags them in 2 waves. If going back, if you remember, there's the first king rebels, and Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, comes along and is like, swats that down, and then takes a bunch of people and craftsmen with him, and then puts his, what is it, nephew? Yeah, nephew, Jehoiakim, in place. And, or does Jehoiakim come first? Jehoiakim, and then what's the other guy's name? Zedekiah. Yeah. Zedekiah. That's it. Zedekiah comes second. Yeah. So Zedekiah is in charge when one rebellion happens. The Babylonians don't take kindly to rebellion. They strip out a bunch of wealthy, influential Jewish people. Second rebellion happens, and it's a repeat, but this time they raise the temple of the ground. They take away anybody of influence, anybody of wealth or meaning, anybody who can read, anybody who can write, all the wealthy merchants, all the royalty that would have been attached, anyone who's got political clout or civic leaders, they all get hauled off to Babylon, leaving behind the poor people. I mean, let's just be frank, calling it what it is. They leave behind the people who are illiterate, the old, the infirmed. They leave behind people who, from Babylon's perspective, are not going to be the wheelers and dealers. They're not going to be the influencers. And the idea here is pretty simple. If you take away the influencers, you're not going to have another rebellion. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. In order to maintain peace and the flow of tax money, you take away anybody who would be the ones to gather the people together in rebellion and resistance. And so that's what they do. They strip the ancient kingdom of Judah of any ability to really put up any more fight. Fair to say? Okay. Now, we've been tracking in 1st and 2nd Kings, but make note that 1st and 2nd Chronicles, also another book in the Bible, tracks with this time period. Personally, I always defer to 1st and 2nd Kings. 1st and 2nd Chronicles is a little bit different. It's got its own nuance. 1st and 2nd Chronicles downplays, because of the author, this book of the Bible. 1st and 2nd Chronicles, if you go to your table of contents of your Bible, like most of the books that have a 1 and a 2, were originally one piece or one book, but it got so big that the editors split it into 2. So even though there's a 1st Chronicles and a 2nd Chronicles, originally it was just simply Chronicles. The author of Chronicles puts an emphasis on temple worship. So if you read in there, there's no references to like creation, patriarchs, wilderness wanderings. There's no references in Chronicles to any of that stuff. It's all about temple. It's all about temple. It's all about temple. The reason this is important is because the author of Chronicles may or may not have also been the author of some other books that we're going to look at tonight, and probably was writing around the time of exile, if not in the exile, probably in the exile, and was looking back fondly and reminding the Jewish people, hey, we used to be all about the temple, and we screwed up. We made mistakes. We lost what it meant to be Jewish and lost the temple because we chased after these other gods, because we were nice and played patty cake with all the locals and began adopting their practices. So, 1st and 2nd Chronicles is interesting because it puts a backdrop to kind of some theological movements, if you will. Now, in this time period as well, there's a lot of questions not only about the idea of restoring the temple, but there's a lot of questions about Messiah and deliverance and rescue, as they are being hauled off, literally in chains or in wagons and all this, marched across, the Middle East, marched across sand and desert and all this sort of stuff. As they're being marched across, they begin to revisit and remember some of the prophetic sayings and some of the prophecy that had happened, right? And so this is going back to the prophets that we looked at earlier that were proven right. At the time, nobody wanted to listen to the prophets because they prophesied doom and gloom. Well, when you're sitting in doom and gloom, they look back and it's kind of like, what's the term? Is it confirmation bias? Is that the term? They look back and they basically are like, yep, those guys were right. They knew what was up. And if you begin to comb through, take, for example, Isaiah, easy one. In Isaiah's prophecies, you also begin to see themes of David and what eventually becomes Messiah or messianic prophecy, right? And so even though the temple is currently destroyed, there is, even as they get hauled off to Babylon, already a sense of, when will God rescue us? How will God rescue us? When and how will some sort of Messiah come? Will the kingdom of David be reestablished? That's the dude staring at you there. That's David. When will the kingdom of David be established once more? When will the temple be rebuilt? When will the heartbeat of the Jewish identity, being the temple, come once again to the forefront? And so as they're traveling, as they're marching off, and throughout any of the literature associated with exile, there is a strong and very clear sense of longing to return. The Jewish people, even as they get marched off and get stuck in exile, they want to come back. They long to return to the golden era of David, where they are their own masters, where they worship God at the temple, where David's kingdom and his heirs are the ones in charge. So this is this theological emphasis, therefore, on Messiah. Kind of Messiah stuff starts to move to the forefront, which is very, very important as we get closer and closer to the New Testament. Thematically, the idea of deliverance is at the forefront when you're stuck in chains in exile. Makes sense. So, we're going to look tonight at one of the books that has to do with a person stuck in exile, Daniel. And then we're going to look at actually how God brings the people back, because believe it or not, they end up coming back, and there is this messianic thread that they explore. So let's do it tonight, beginning with Daniel. Let's go to Daniel. What is the story that Daniel is most known for? What is the story that Daniel is most known for? Put it in the comments. What is the story Daniel is most known for? There's a few in there, but there's one or two that are the big ones. I'm trying to think of a song. Is there any song that goes with it? The one that I'm thinking of. I don't know any songs. Come on, guys. What's the story you think that Daniel's most known for? Yep. CJ, way to go, CJ. Yep, good. You guys got it. Surviving the Lion's Den. Oh, nice picture. I didn't even know there was an emoji of lion. There you go, guys. Nicely done. So, most people know the name Daniel and begin to associate with the story of Daniel in the Lion's Den. It is a classic little story. Writing on the wall. Good question. Little less known. It is actually a very famous story too. There you go. Let's do that. That's fun. What are the other stories from the book of Daniel? Writing on the wall is actually a very big one, but people don't know that it's from the book of Daniel. When people use the term the writings on the wall, you guys ever heard that term before? It's a reference to the book of Daniel. Way to go. Tracy, bonus points for you. That is very, very common, but people don't know that it's actually attributed to Daniel. Other stories that you guys might find in the book of Daniel. Anyone else? What other stories do you know from the book of Daniel? One of the more famous stories doesn't even have to do with Daniel himself. One, I'll give you some hints. There you go. Way to go, Leo. Rack, Shack, and Benny. I've been watching some Veggie Tales. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Yes. There is a very famous story in the book of Daniel as well. Yes, there is a lot of vision stories. Sarah, very good. There is a ton of apocalyptic literature in the book of Daniel. And so Daniel's very famous for all these weird, wacky visions that he has. Patty, the three guys in the furnace. Their names are too long to name. Leo's got your back. Rack, Shack, and Benny is the... there's a great Veggie Tales that does this story. You're right, Patty. One of the other more famous stories from the book of Daniel has to do with Daniel's companions. Daniel is not alone, and one of the stories has to do with how three of his companions get thrown into the fiery furnace. Good, nice. All right, well, let's dive into a little bit. And I want to show you guys a couple interesting quirks. That's just interesting when you think about the book of Daniel. Let's go into the scripture itself. Okay. This is Daniel, and Nebuchadnezzar is the king of Babylon, and he's the guy that raised the temple and the whole bit, okay? King of Nebuchadnezzar. And you can see King Jehoiakim is reigning at the time of Judah. You know, he came, he besieged it, all this sort of stuff. There you go. Nebuchadnezzar took people, objects back to the land of Babylon. this is the more important part. Then the king ordered his chief of staff to bring the palace some of the young men of Judah's royal family and of the other noble families, those who had been brought as Babylonian captives. Select only strong, healthy, good-looking young men, the cream of the crop. Make sure they are well versed in every branch of learning, are gifted with knowledge and good judgment, and are suited to serve in the royal palace. Train these young men in the language and the literature of Babylon. The king assigned them a daily ration of food and wine from his own kitchens, and they were trained for 3 years, and then they would enter into royal service. AKA, get me a bunch of interns. Want a bunch of interns that will learn from me how to run my kingdom, and then will eventually run it for me. That's basically what's going on there. Okay? There is a very, well, maybe it's not so subtle. There is also the reality here of what he's going to try to do. The fancy term is assimilate. Bring into Babylon. He is going to wipe them of their previous Jewish identity and turn them into Babylonians, where they begin to no longer see themselves first and foremost as Jewish, but basically they will begin to see themselves as Babylonians. Good looking sounds a little sus. Yeah, he wants not only, this is fascinating, right? He wants not only people, he wants the cream of the crop. He wants people who are smart, intelligent, they're going to serve. He wants them strong and healthy and even good looking. Why? He wants to raise up within the Jewish people icons for the rest of the Jewish people to appreciate and wish that they could be like them. He is raising up a select group within the Jewish people and turning them into Babylonians, so that when the rest of the Jewish people think of them, they will be also inspired and actually desire to be like them, aka be little Babylonians too. So this is all very strategic. This is all very, very intentional. Well, here are the 4 guys: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. 4 young men, all chosen from the tribe of Judah. Here's an example of becoming Babylonian. He gives them Babylonian names. Daniel was called Belteshazzar. Hananiah was called Shadrach. Mishael was called Meshach. And Azariah was called Abednego. These are Babylonian names. Belteshazzar. That's super Babylonian. Abednego. That's super Babylonian. So this is what they're going to try to do. They're going to take Daniel and turn him into a Babylonian. So Daniel is this young rock star, up and coming, royalty, smart, intelligent, good looking young guy that all the girls, all the Jewish girls want to be with and all the Jewish boys want to be. And the king's going to make them into little Babylonians. Now, here's what's interesting. Daniel knows what's up. Daniel knows and can see through the efforts to strip him of his Jewish identity. And he wants nothing to do with it. Daniel is determined not to defile himself by eating the food and the wine given to them by the king. This is a big deal. Why in the world is he balking at some free food and good wine given from the king's own kitchens? Pretty simple. Not Jewish. If you're Babylonians, it's like, pass me the bacon. You know, let's do it. Is that seafood over there? Some clam shells and some shrimp and everything? Shrimp and dip. Yes, please. Jewish? That would be unclean. Not supposed to do that. No bacon for you. And so Daniel is being tempted to say, yeah, have the food, have the wine, be a Babylonian. And he says, no way, not going to happen. Yes, Michelle. Sounds what they did to immigrants who came to the USA. This is an old empirical practice. You know, you can find this, the process by which one absorbs and allows people to enter into a larger grouping is often by replacing values, replacing religion, replacing language, even down to replacing your names with the dominant one. Yes, absolutely. Good parallel. That's essentially what they're doing. So Daniel, though, recognizes this, sees this, and says, "Nuh-uh, not for me. I'm a Jew. Thank you very much." He asked the chief of the staff for permission, saying, "I don't eat bacon. It's not cool." Now, God had given the chief of staff both respect and affection for Daniel. God's paving the way here. But he responded, "I'm afraid of the Lord the king, who has ordered that you eat this food and wine. If you become pale and thin compared to the other youths of your age, I'm afraid the king will have me beheaded." So Daniel's not, he's asking for something actually a little bit more substantial than at first glance. The idea here is the chief of staff needs to make sure that all these young men become good little Babylonians. And Daniel's saying, "I don't want to be a good little Babylonian." And particularly, if you're not going to eat the food that we give you, what are you going to eat? You're going to wither away, and the king's going to take note of that, and this whole king scheme here is going to dissolve. Well, Daniel convinces him anyways. He says, "Put me to test. For 10 days, I'll be a vegetarian." Pretty straightforward. The big issue in the Jewish community having to do with dietary restrictions mostly has to do with meat. And so Daniel just avoids the whole thing and saying, "Great, I'll just go, give me the veggie burger instead and water. And at the end of 10 days, if I don't look handsome and rugged and buff, then this is just 10 days worth. Like, let's just compare. Let's see what you make your decision in light of this trial period." So he agrees. Well, at the end of 10 days, Daniel and his 3 friends look healthier and better nourished than the young men who had been eating the food assigned by the king. There is another statement that's happening here. In order for Daniel to make this suggestion, and for Daniel to have 3 friends on board, that necessitates and means there are other Jewish boys and girls who are choosing to eat from the king's table. What you have in the book of Daniel from the get-go, this is chapter 1, is this tension. What does it mean to be Jewish, and will you remain Jewish? Or will you abandon your Jewish heritage and identity and instead embrace the Babylonian way of life? Daniel and his 3 friends remain committed to being Jewish. Not all his fellow Jews are on board. There are others here who do eat from the king's table. That's the tension in the book of Daniel. One of them, admittedly, one of them. But will you be faithful to God even when you are outnumbered, outmanned, outgunned, behind enemy lines, however you want to say it? Well, 10 days goes well. They're nourished, they're nourished, they look good, and so from then on, it's all good. And on top of that, God sees and responds to these 4 young men. He gives them an unusual aptitude for understanding every aspect of wisdom and literature. And God gives Daniel the special ability to interpret the meanings of visions and dreams. This will come in very handy. Well, when the training period is done, 3 years have gone by, he brings them all to the king. The king talked with them, and no one had impressed him as much as Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So, whenever the king consulted them in any matter that required wisdom and balanced judgment, he found them 10 times more capable than any of the magicians and enchanters in his entire kingdom. Daniel remained in the royal service until the first reign of the year of King Cyrus. That sets up Daniel. That's chapter 1 of Daniel. Okay, and it sets up the book, the tension that you're going to find. He does come in very handy with this whole interpretation thing. The ability to interpret dreams. Nebuchadnezzar ends up having some dreams. None of the magicians nobody else can tell what's going on, but Daniel can. So Daniel gets that much more put into. In the end, Daniel ends up running the empire on behalf of the Babylonians. It's very akin, if you think back to the story of Joseph, where Joseph is he's a slave, and he gets thrown in prison. I mean, everything goes wrong for poor Joseph. And yet, at the end of his story, God takes something horrible and uses it for good. This is another thematic thing that we can see, that God takes even exile and can use it for good. He can take the Jewish way of the broken heart of the Jewish people and use it for good. Daniel is a living, breathing example of that. Okay? Where in the end, Daniel actually lasts longer than the Babylonian Empire. He ends up being... King Cyrus is Persian. See the footnote here. Yeah. Cyrus began his reign over Babylon. Cyrus is actually a Persian king. And Daniel actually remains throughout numerous empires. The Medes, the Persians, and the Babylonians. 3 empires. Nations rise, nations fall. Daniel still stays strong. Chapter 3 shows... Let's jump to 3 real quick. Shows how his friends deal with the blazing furnace. So now that we have the example of Daniel, we see the ripple effect of Daniel's decision moving outward to the lives of his 3 companions. Nebuchadnezzar makes a gold statue. It's a big deal. And the idea is, when you hear a trumpet, everybody, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, when you hear the band, you're supposed to bow down and worship this gold statue. Anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. Well, as you can imagine, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego do not bow down when they hear the trumpets. And their answer, we don't need to fit, if we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He can rescue us. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, we will never serve your gods or worship the golden statue you set up. So now it is moved. It continues to, the ripples continue to move outward into more and more lives. More than just Daniel. Now it's into these companions. And that's what happens. They get thrown into the blazing furnace, and an angel shows up. Where is it? Look, I see 4 men, unbound, walking around in the fire, unharmed. The 4th looks like a god. Angel. The Nebuchadnezzar comes close. He shouts in there like, "Hey, you still alive? Come here." And so they do. They didn't even smell like smoke. It's a cool story. It's a cool story. So that's, Daniel, it has to do with this tension of, will you become Babylonian, worship the Babylonian gods, adopt their language, their values, their culture, or will you remain Jewish? And the answer is, you remain Jewish. Even if it costs you your life, even if you got to be thrown in a furnace, even if you have to be thrown in a lion's den, you remain faithful and you remain Jewish. It is a commentary on Jews and God being stronger and greater, faith being stronger and greater than the empires of this world. And that is perhaps most clearly shown in the end of Daniel, when Daniel starts having some of his own dreams, and it's some trippy stuff. He ends up being a prophet, prophesying, and describes his visions. Daniel's book is one of the few books that we refer to as apocalyptic literature. Apocalyptic. It's on par with the book of Revelation in the New Testament, right? Revelations is one of those books that has to do with like the end of the world. It's a terrible way of saying it. It has to do with God's future. And Daniel gets glimpses of some of that apocalyptic future stuff. Yeah, that's exactly right. Daniel knew God is in charge. Daniel knew that God was the one in charge, not Babylon. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much it. So that's the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel is a great book. It's a great book. And it is all taking place inside Babylonian captivity, the Babylonian exile. And again, showing some of these shifts in faith and shifts in how to think, and some of these strong tensions that are coming to the forefront in the Jewish faith. All right, let's talk a little bit about the return from exile, because as Daniel, let me see if I've got my timeline. Yeah, can you guys see this? Nope. Let me see if I can help you see it. Where is... Daniel's not on here, but that's okay. Ah. Okay, I'm going to show you if this... Can you guys see this? It's kind of small, kind of squinty. But here's a timeline from my software. So the reason this is kind of nice is because it will lay out for us. Remember they go into exile in different waves. Okay, Ezekiel kicks up as a prophet right around the first wave. The first Jewish temple is destroyed in 587. And they are sitting in exile then, okay? So they're sitting in exile beginning, the earliest is 597, okay? The earliest that happens is the reign of Zedekiah in Judah. That's when the first kind of waves start happening. So they're in exile for, 80 years or so. A generation. An entire generation before conversation begins to happen of returning to Jerusalem. Eventually, people are allowed to return to Jerusalem. Here on this timeline, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are exiled to Babylon. Can you guys see that in 605? There's other things happening in the world at this time as well. I want to do general interests. Show you some parallels at the same time in the world. Take me to Greece. What's going on in Greece? Neo-Babylonian. I'd have to go into more detail. Yeah, the Medes. Alright, this doesn't have what I wanted it to have. I wanted to show you guys. It's around this time that you start getting like Plato and Socrates and some of these other big names starts happening more and more. You start to see other things happening in the world. Okay. Here's the big deal. Here's what you need to see. Where is it? Right here in 538 BCE, you start getting waves, and in 537, you start getting waves of people returning to ancient Israel. So exile starts in as early as 597, and then the return happens as early as 537. So you've got 60 years of difference there, okay? But that's earliest to earliest. That's earliest to earliest. Yeah. Let me show you how it happens. The return to ancient Israel happens in the Bible in really two different books. And these two books, ironically, were again one book originally. And so it's a little hard to talk about. It's a little complicated because the book of Ezra and Nehemiah at one time were together. They were written as a cohesive whole. Scholars kind of wonder, generally speaking, people think that it could be the same guy who wrote Chronicles. Okay, same Jewish person who wrote the Chronicles, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, may have also written Ezra and Nehemiah. In a lot of literature, it's even referred to as Ezra and Nehemiah. Instead of Ezra and Nehemiah, it's referred to simply as Ezra and Nehemiah. It is broken, to complicate it further, Ezra and Nehemiah is broken into 3 parts, or 3 accounts. It has to do with, first, a guy named Zerubbabel. Then it has to do with Ezra. And then it has to do with Nehemiah. The first wave of return happens with a guy named... I'll show you. He's got the S name. He's boring. There's nothing that happens with him. Let's just go to Ezra. That's the best way to do this. Let's go to Ezra, shall we? This is Ezra chapter 1. By this time, Cyrus, the king of Persia, this is the same guy we just referred to in the book of Daniel. Like the book of Daniel, he reigned up until the time of King Cyrus. This is King Cyrus of Persia. So King Cyrus of Persia allows for a return. He's not as concerned with the Babylonians. The Persian Empire does government different. And so he's like, yeah, go back home. If that's important to you, go back home. And even more particularly, he allows and even says, like, this is good for you to go back home and reinstitute your worship. He even goes so far, right? The Lord, the God of heavens, has given me all the kings of the earth. He has appointed me to build him a temple at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Any of you who are his people may go to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. May your God be with you. The idea here is that King Cyrus of Persia wants as many gods on his side as possible. King Cyrus is not Jewish. He's Persia. But he rules an empire. And he knows both politically as well as in regards to people's religious faith, it's nice to have as many happy gods as possible. So, go build your god a temple. Make him happy so that there's one more god out there that gives my empire a thumbs up. Okay? So, this is what happens. They pack everything up. They've been sitting in exile for at least 60 years or so. Time to go back home. And in fact, God goes before them in such a way as that, like, Cyrus and his compadres end up helping pay for the trip, if you will. Okay? He even brings out the articles King Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the Lord's temple in Jerusalem and placed them in his temple's own gods. He directs them with presents and items and all this sort of stuff. And he gives them to this guy, Sheshbazzar, the leader of the exiles returning to Judah. Sheshbazzar is the first wave returning. He's the first one, Sheshbazzar. But ironically, we actually don't know a lot about him, and we don't really know what much that happens in relation to Sheshbazzar. The big guy to know is Zerubbabel. He's the big guy to know. Okay. So another guy goes kind of with Sheshbazzar, or perhaps slightly after. We're not sure. Probably slightly after. A year or two after, there's another wave with Zerubbabel at the head. Zerubbabel is a sharp cookie. He's kind of a civic leader, and he leads this return from exile. And the first thing that Zerubbabel does is to follow through on what Cyrus had asked and rebuild the temple. So Zerubbabel gathers the exiles together and says, come on, y'all, time to go back home. And the first thing that we do is we need to rebuild our temple. It used to be that to be Jewish was to worship at the temple. So we need ourselves a temple once again. And so that's what Zerubbabel does. Now, things start off okay. They make their way back and they lay the foundations, but then they start getting a little lackadaisical. They start focusing on their own homes. They start focusing on resettling Jerusalem, and the populace, the people who have come back, are trying to figure out how to reestablish their lives. And the temple doesn't get finished. Temple goes unfinished for a while. So God sends Haggai and Zechariah to kick the people in the pants and say, hey, I'm the one who's actually behind all this stuff. Finish the temple. You're building yourselves beautiful homes and lattices and gardens while my temple is just sitting there. So hop to. Let's finish this thing. So that's what Zerubbabel does. So his contemporaries would be those two small, very small books of Haggai and Zechariah. If you're interested in learning more about like Haggai, we did a sermon series a couple years ago on Haggai. If you go to Vimeo, go to our Vimeo page, and you can find a sermon series on Haggai if you want to know more about Haggai. But eventually, finally, under Zerubbabel, they do finish building the temple in 515 BCE. The temple is back. The temple is reestablished in 515 BCE. It's this big moment. They dedicate the temple. And when they rededicate this new temple, they expect, just like in the olden days, like if you go back to, the Deuteronomy, and if you go back to Exodus, and they're expecting that when, just like in Solomon's day with the tabernacle and with Solomon's temple, they're expecting God's presence to manifest in the temple. Like a big cloud coming down or fire coming down. That's historically kind of what happened, so that the people knew that God was there. And nothing happens. It's like, uh-oh. Uh-oh. What went wrong? Where's God? Where is he? Why isn't this like it was before? Why isn't this temple working the way? What would we do? What's wrong? And so there's actually, the Zerubbabel's. It's referred to as the Book of Zerubbabel. It's very confusing. It's within the Book of Ezra. But the story with Zerubbabel ends with the temple appearing to be like absent of God's blessing. Kind of foreboding. Not a good way to end Zerubbabel's story. Well, after Zerubbabel, then you get the next guy, Ezra. And Ezra is a priest. Ezra is a priest. He can actually track his lineage as a priest all the way back to Aaron through a guy named Zadok. He's a priest. And that means he's an expert in religious worship and theology as a priest. He has preserved an understanding of the Jewish way of life. And on top of it, Ezra is a scribe. That's a fancy way of saying he knows his Bible inside out and upside down. Ezra knows how to lead worship, and he knows his Bible. And he leads another group of Jewish people back. Okay, y'all tracking? He is an expert, therefore, in what it means to be Jewish despite the exile. Ezra knows what it means to be Jewish, even despite the exile. And the chapters of Ezra, Ezra 1 through 6, this is all about Zerubbabel and rebuilding. Once you get into 7 to 10, you get the story of Ezra. You know, here's his Zadok, here's his lineage, son of Aaron the high priest. He's a scribe, well versed in the law of Moses. He comes up to Jerusalem from Babylon. Okay? So, when Ezra arrives, when he shows up, his goal, his orientation is to say, all right, we got a bunch of Jews back, but they don't know what it means to be Jewish. He's showing up to a bunch of people who had traveled from Babylon in captivity. And as well, don't forget all the poor people who had been left behind. Don't forget, there are all these Jews who had been abandoned in Jerusalem and not taken into the Babylonian captivity. So they have pretty much forgotten what it means to be Jewish. They have no temple, they have no money, and as it turns out, they end up marrying all the local people and making families and trying to make a life. Ezra shows up and he starts tearing his hair out. Why? Because nobody knows what it means to be Jewish anymore. Everybody forgot. The Babylonian people don't know and remember what it means to be Jewish. And the people left behind don't remember what it means to be Jewish. So Ezra is being sent to be the Jewish expert. In order to do this, Ezra has one of the most controversial stances in the Bible. It's one we never preach on. Intermarriage. Here's the dealio. There's this whole chapter dedicated to it, but it's pretty simple. Many of the people of Israel, and even some of the priests and Levites, have not kept themselves separate from the other peoples living in the land. They've taken up detestable practices of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, Jebusites, Ammonites, Moabites, Egyptians, and Amorites. For the men of Israel have married women from these people and have taken them as wives for their sons. So the holy race has become polluted by these mixed marriages. Worse yet, the leaders and officials have led them in this outrage. When I heard this, I tore my cloak and my shirt, pulled hair from my head and beard, and sat down, utterly shocked. It was an outrage, even committed by the exiles. I sat there appalled. All right, why is Ezra so torn up over this whole marriage thing? What's the big deal? Because the reason why they went into exile is because the Jewish people started marrying and adopting the practices of the locals. It's going to be 1st and 2nd Kings all over again. Ezra is actually a horribly depressing book because it shows you how broken people are. Despite the discipline of the exile, as soon as the Jewish people come back home, they immediately start heading down the same path they had headed down that led them into exile in the first place. Brutal. Brutal. And Ezra sees this. Ezra realizes this. Ezra can see the writing on the wall. And he says, oh my gosh, this is going to be nothing but a repeat. We are going to abandon our own God, having just come back to God's promised land, and we are going to start worshiping these other gods and these other cultures and picking up the detestable practices of these indigenous people that God, going all the way back to Joshua, had said have nothing to do with them. Get rid of them. Get away from them. It's all about to happen again. So Ezra finishes kind of on a downer note, just like Zerubbabel's story. All right, that leaves one more story for us to quickly, very, very quickly cover, and that's Nehemiah. Nehemiah is his own book. In our Bibles, he's got his own book. The snapshot of Nehemiah, it's a great story if you want to read it. Nehemiah is more or less a administrator, while Zerubbabel was in charge of rebuilding the temple, while Ezra was in charge of rebuilding Jewish faithfulness. Nehemiah is in charge of rebuilding Jerusalem, the city, making it a firm city and flourishing city once more. It is encapsulated by the idea of rebuilding Jerusalem's walls. You're not a good city if you ain't got walls. You are suspect to attack. You are vulnerable. But if you are fortified, you are a place of protection and of influence in the region. Nehemiah faces all sorts of opposition because the locals don't want Jerusalem back on the map. The locals in Samaria, the Amorites, they don't want a bunch of Jews showing up and becoming influential again. And so Nehemiah faces all this opposition. He ends up rebuilding the walls in 52 days and has to do it in shifts with people and guards, basically guards building. That people had to build with their spears next to them. But he does succeed in doing it. He, too, at the end of his story, ends on a downer note as well. He tries to do these reforms, various reforms, and they're good. They're good reforms, but he gets furious that he has to do any sort of reform to begin with. Why? Well, because the Jewish people who have now come back and are reestablishing Jerusalem and reestablishing the Jewish way of life aren't living like Jews. They're working on the Sabbath. Simple example. So Nehemiah shuts down the city on the Sabbath. And it's a bizarre thought that he would even have to do that. Why? Because they're Jews. They should know better. All right. All this to say, in the book of Ezra and the book of Nehemiah, while there are wonderful glimpses of hope and future and restoration and rededication, the underlying theme is that despite coming back from captivity, the Jewish people still need a deeper sense of deliverance. They may be delivered from Babylon, but they are not delivered from their own brokenness and selfishness. The reason this is all so very important to us is because it sets the table for a Messiah. Some of the people thought Zerubbabel was the Messiah. Turns out he wasn't. Why? Very clearly, he built the temple, but the temple didn't usher in the new deep age and a new creation. Ezra and Nehemiah sets us up to say, wow, we need a different kind of Messiah. Someone who's going to fix what's going on inside, not just what's going on outside. Make sense? There you have it, guys. I went a couple minutes over. Forgive me. Beg your forgiveness. Beg your forgiveness. Thanks, though. What do you think? Ezra and Nehemiah. We just covered like 3 books of the Bible that fast, guys. That was pretty fast. I think it was pretty fast. Don't you? Not too bad. 3 books of the Bible. Daniel, Ezra, and Nehemiah. Bang! Any of you guys have a favorite out of those 3 books, if you know them? Which one's your favorite? Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah. Which one's your favorite? You like Daniel and Lion's Den? Do you like Nehemiah rebuilding the walls? Ezra has passion and fervor for reestablishing faithfulness, that he's just got so much zeal in there that's to be appreciated and valued. What's your fave? Daniel, Ezra, or Nehemiah? You still awake out there? They put you to sleep. While you're thinking about it, Ezra, Nehemiah, Daniel, I just wanted to say thanks. As always, guys, I'm always so appreciative that you guys join me as part of our online community, man. It is so good to be with you on these nights. I really enjoy spending time with you and having the chance to be in the Word and dig into it. Make the invitation to you, to all. Please come hang out with us. We're about to start our Lenten journey. So 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10:30 in the Amen. I am statements. Jesus in his own words. Book of John. We're going to be tracking with the I am statements all the way up to Easter Sunday. Don't forget, want to make the invitation as well, Ash Wednesday tomorrow night. Come hang out with me and others at Christ Church for the Ash Wednesday service. It's at 7 p.m. You can join us on site or online, as always. We got some votes for Daniel. Ooh, lots of Daniel. All right. Nobody's like, Ezra what? Ezra who? Nehemiah. What in the world? All right, lots of votes for Daniel. Okay. All right, fair enough. That's okay. My wife loves Nehemiah. She loves Nehemiah. If we had a son, she always wanted to make the case that we would name him Nehemiah. But my argument was, what do you nickname what's Nehemiah's nickname? Like, what do his friends call him? Nehi. Come here, Nehi. Like, I don't know. All right, that's what I got for you tonight. So glad you guys enjoyed Daniel. We spent the most time on Daniel, so I'm glad that was enjoyable for you. God bless you. Have a great rest of the night, guys. Can't wait to see you again next week. We'll be doing the same thing, tracking along. If you're not in an Easter group, sign up for an Easter group. Word of encouragement and an invitation to do that. You can join me and Mike on Wednesday nights. If you're looking for that, you can always hop in there. Go to the website for more, as always. But we'll see you on Ash Wednesday tomorrow. Ash Wednesday is... I almost want to say it's my favorite day of the year, but Easter's better, right? Good for you, like Easter's Easter. But Ash Wednesday is right there for me personally because of what it means and the significance of it. Easter is better because, well, Ash Wednesday points you to Easter. John, thank you. Thank you for joining. So appreciate having you here. Hope you're doing well, my friend. We miss seeing you, but hope you are warm and safe and well, John. Thanks for tuning in tonight. Neum. Neum. That's a good idea. Okay, I'll bite on that. Neum? Like Nehemiah? Neum? Rhymes with Liam? I could see that, Tracy. Like, you know, I don't know. Nehemiah. Neum. That's probably the best that I've heard, because I've heard a couple others that were just weird. Yeah. If you can come up with a nickname for Nehemiah, let me know. As it turns out, we're going to be having 3 girls, so we're now back at the story of how do we find a girl's name. So, anyways, thank you everybody. God bless you. Have a wonderful rest of the night. Thanks for spending time on the C3 stream. Go live some lives. Go elevate Christ. Go be to church for those who aren't here yet. See ya tomorrow for Ash Wednesday, and if not tomorrow, then I hope to see you on Sunday, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10:30 for the first of the I am statements. God bless, guys. Have a great night.